Welcome everyone to another Wednesday Live. Super excited to have Anthony on here. Anthony, welcome.
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, welcome. So we'll talk a little bit about getting more done in less time. So you can see here it's about getting 4 times more done in half the time, which if anyone is doing the math, is basically 8 times more. But again, it's really about looking into what I call brain science. Other people call it neuroscience, really looking at things like energy, focus, flow. These are things that I really love talking about. I even published a guide about crushing your chaos. And there's so many people who are trying to do more with less. That's a real problem. And it can affect some people more than others. You know, some people who are neurodivergent, maybe ADHD, bipolar disorder, and we touch upon those things specifically. Also people in high power positions, but it also people in stressful jobs. Maybe they're in an ER, a police responder. Anthony, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself before we touch upon some of these points?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm originally trained as an engineer myself, but as much as I found engineering fulfilling, there was something deeper that my life trajectory pivoted towards. Through my love of music festivals, it has given me the wanting to pursue the entrepreneurial path, and the entrepreneurial path has led me to coaching. And actually, the link between the festivals and the coaching is all about mental health. I was diagnosed with bipolar myself in 2017, had my first hospitalization, a second one in 2019, shortly after I found my purpose in coaching. And then since then, I've been working to really get to the root cause of what might have been within me that caused these surface level things, and really rewiring my brain naturally, partly thanks to neuroscience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's really touching to hear, because sometimes we have to go through these things like the hospitalizations, the dark times, the stressors. Someone who's also been diagnosed with bipolar disorder myself, I've been exactly where you are, unfortunately, but there's also an upside to that, is some of the gifts that have come out of it. And a lot of people don't really see these hidden gifts for what they are at the time. So when people talk about things that, they want to have more energy, they want to have more focus, and they have more flow, being in somewhere like, a hospital or being diagnosed, that is a pretty low state to be in. Your energy is pretty much zapped, and anyone who has been diagnosed with bipolar disorder knows that, focus, you're focused on a million different things that are like so many. It's like your brain is going like this. Same kind of thing with ADHD. One thing here, one thing. It's switching all the time. So how do you go from, these states to slowing down, I suppose? How do you do that?
For me, it was all when I discovered that there was a neuroscience to flow. I'd realized when I started training in flow with the Flow Research Collective that this was the state that I had been chasing when I was escaping life, whether it was drinking or anything else at festivals, even just dancing for a long time, right? It was always about that state of flow. And so once I learned that actually there was a neuroscience, it could be trained, it could be a coaching specialization. And exactly at the moment I was looking for a coaching specialization to go deeper into, it connected all of the dots for me. And the big thing with flow is being anti-burnout, anti-overwhelm philosophy by focusing on leverage. Leverage being, you want to plan for the activities that will 100x your goals rather than 1 point, incremental gains. You want exponential gains. And so, yeah, that's the big pillar, I would say,
100%.
About slowing down.
Yeah, and it's about that compound interest. In the world that says, oh, we need to speed up more, actually, the answer is the opposite. You can do more with less by slowing down. And it's really about subtraction. It's interesting you were saying about the festivals, how you're an engineer before. I suppose like one way to describe it could be like a mind engineer now, as opposed to.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
But a lot of people who watch this are usually very, left-brained, logical people, a bit like how I was, very left-brained over here, very, categorical. I trained as an accountant at one point to my own peril. But how was it that like an engineer ends up at like these kind of like festivals and then dancing and this kind of stuff? Not to say that engineers can't dance at all,
Yeah.
but really, I mean, it's a question of what that unlocked inside of you, because it's a really interesting journey to go from engineering to going to festivals to then entrepreneurship.
Yeah, and I think actually this is where the ADHD side comes in. I think if I had been diagnosed with ADHD before, I might have not gotten to the points of getting diagnosed with bipolar. But with ADHD, some of the remedies to it is stimulation, right? It's intensity, and I was very drawn to high-powered music, very, very fast, trance, techno, that sort of thing. And so when I would go out dancing, and then I explored festivals, to kind of go deeper into that world. But I think I was self-medicating for ADHD, to be honest.
Yeah. Through the dancing and the music, like seeking those peak experiences, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And as we know at festivals, sometimes an amount of drinking, drugs. I remember when I was at a festival last year, there was actually an alcohol-free festival. You couldn't buy alcohol inside the festival, and that's pretty common now in the UK. And yeah, then there was one person who I met, and they said, oh, and then they just said to me, oh, I had a couple of pints of beer. And they must have snuck it in. Fair enough. Oh, and I've done some mushrooms too. And then in front of me, then this person who I hadn't met a few hours before then decided they would go off and do ketamine and cocaine that they asked a stranger for. And I was like, you know what? I'm not going to babysit this person. And that's the kind of thing that's typical at a festival. Not every festival, of course. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with seeking that or chasing it, because what people really want isn't necessarily so-called the high of the drug, but that peak experience that is kind of something that you have found a way to give people naturally. So they don't have to escape from certain pains, numb sensations, which is sometimes why people drink or smoke or do this. But you found a natural way to get there. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah. I would say I've put together a roadmap that leads to getting high on life rather than whatever else might not be so conducive to health. And of course, there's all bunch of spectrums in that. But if you want to move away from the use of certain substances, whether it's certain drugs or whether it's alcohol or smokables, then there is something that every moment of use that those substances have is there to teach you about yourself, that you can examine what is it from my past that has led me to wanting to use this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in terms of getting there, I guess like when people think of like a roadmap, oftentimes, like, again, it doesn't sound as sexy as something like just taking a pill and swallowing it, because there's a difference. But I guess the difference is there's a difference between, the instant hit when you swallow something and then you get the side effects, the hangovers, versus something that's long-term, more sustainable. And this comes into the idea of instant versus delayed gratification. A lot of people, whether they are neurodivergent or not, seek the instant hit. They want it now. Something like going to the gym every day or following a program or a process, your roadmap, that takes time, but it's more sustainable, right?
That's exactly it. And it's unfortunate, but we're not really wired to be able to see that value. We're more wired, our brain is more wired for the short-term effect. And we also have that dopamine addiction kind of cycle, which gets us hooked onto the more instant gratification stuff. So it's hard to break free from, but it absolutely can be done.
Yeah. And, in small amounts, I guess that's good. Large doses, that can be destructive. But why is it that we're so hooked on instant gratification? Like, the reward of the now, short term versus long term?
I'd say that's a very complex puzzle, but I think there's definitely some societal aspects to it. There's some trauma aspects to it. There's some genetic components to it, some lifestyle components. We're living in a world where technology has grown exponentially at a faster rate than our biology has been able to adapt. And so we're constantly cooked. We're bombarded with way more information than we can handle. And it really is misaligned with our mind-body system.
Yeah. I mean, that's what's called future shock, which is, if anyone here is familiar with the concept of culture shock, you go from one country to another, and then everything is a bit different. It's topsy-turvy. The thing about that, like I'm in Peru at the moment, away from the UK. I've been here for a while. I can go back to the UK or Europe or somewhere where there's a similar culture. And this is now the fourth country I've lived in, so I'm very familiar with culture shock. But it's still a shock. Future shock is when time goes exponentially faster because of the advances in technology, and you cannot go back in time. You can't go back from the future. As you said, with the wiring that we have, we aren't wired for using mobile phones every single day. It's just not in our makeup. We're still living with a brain that's used to living in caves. And of course, there's been cognitive advances. The problem is, how are we going to cope with all of this information overload? Everything that we see on our screens. Because we're used to getting, same day delivery from Amazon now. We're used to, thinking, I want this. I want to go on a date. You're on a date 20 minutes later because you swipe someone. How do we cope with all of that? When there's so many short-term rewards we can get at, when sometimes it's the long-term drives for something like a relationship instead of the quick date, that may disappoint anyway. Or, saving money to go on a holiday rather than just instantly adding it to the cart and Amazon and then a drone will deliver it. What can we do about all of this?
I think there are different lenses in which we can view that situation. One is on the wider global and societal economic kind of scales, and that requires societal intervention, changing the way that we live and work. I mean, we have experienced big shifts when COVID happened in terms of moving towards working from home. That has created a mix of things, some positive, some negative, but it would have to be changes at that kind of scale. But on the individual level, what I would say is flow is the perfect way to be able to understand our brains and how we're hooked, because businesses are using neuromarketers and they're using neuroscience to get us hooked. So it's almost the due diligence that we have to do to understand our own brains to the level of, I can see where you're trying to hook me, and I can consciously choose to not be hooked if I want to. But at least having that power by knowing how sort of these dopamine-driven cycles work, and our different states of consciousness depending on what's going on.
Yeah, it's really building that awareness muscle of being like, okay, I understand this, I'm aware, and I have a choice. That's what empowerment is. It's basically having the choice between being run by the unconscious programs and the bombardment of media or wherever versus, I understand what's going on, I see through the game, but I can do something about it. And you still may want to have the cheeseburger anyway. Sometimes we want that.
Exactly, because it's all about balance at the end of the day. And as you said, I think it is important to note it's the awareness that matters, because it empowers people to make that choice.
Yeah.
Our long-term health, whether it's mental or physical, is nothing but the accumulation of all our average days, all of our, lifespan, habits, etc. So it's about also valuing health instead of the quick fixes that might be not so good for health, but being empowered enough to find the right balance that works for you.
100%. It's finding what works for people. And we've spoken a lot about flow, but a lot of people watching this may not even be aware of what is flow, even though we've all experienced it at some point in our lives, multiple times in our lives, in fact. So, how would you describe flow to a complete newcomer, someone watching this and is then they're thinking, like, oh, what is it that they're talking about?
Yeah, flow is that state in which you are totally absorbed by the activity that you're doing. And the most noticeable characteristic of it would be that time flies. There's a timelessness, and it can go in either direction. What I mean is, an activity that you do for 3 hours might feel like 1 hour, or an intense activity that you do for 5 minutes might feel like half an hour. But the point is, there is a distortion compared to the reality. That's the biggest characteristic of flow. And another one that's also very much noteworthy is there's a blending of you, like yourself, your essence, what you are, and the activity itself. Almost like action and awareness are merging into one with that activity. So it could be characteristic of spiritual experiences, but we've all certainly experienced flow with one of the activities that bring us most joy. Effortless joy would be one of those things. And you could be, any human has the ability to get into flow, and we can get into flow with any activity.
And there's many activities that are quite common to this experience. I mean, things that come to mind, and the most obvious one is having sex. You know, when you are in such a present state and moment and you're with someone, it's that essence, because it characterizes the joy, the timelessness. That's one. You know, intense exercise, for example, whether that's weightlifting or running, and it's very common in running, you know, long distance running, really common to get into these experiences. A lot of people talk about this and just experience that sense of timelessness, you know, thought disappearing, and then you can withstand the pain. Same thing in weightlifting, other intensive activities, anything creative such as painting, sculpting, writing. Sometimes we just lose yourself, and even professional pursuits, you know, speaking on stage for me, for example, is something where I commonly experience it. Sometimes even on a live video, in my work, coaching, training. There's so many times where I can get into this state. Anything else that you think are common places where people have experienced flow in the past, when they're watching, then they can think back and think, oh yeah, this is when I was in flow, without realizing it. Anything else you can think of, Anthony?
Literally anything that is a strong motivator and that brings us joy. I mean, I think you touch a wide range of activities with the sports and the creative activities, as well as the social and the sexual. That's absolutely all. I think we can have also a wider scope of flow that's not just one activity based, but also like the overall feel of a festival might be flowy, or the overall feel of a holiday period could be something flowy, or like a retreat or something like that.
Well, definitely, because like when we're on a holiday and we don't take our work with us, it's really a question and a sense of things slowing down. And I guess we've all experienced the sensation of being at the beach and there's nothing to think about in that moment, you know? And I guess how can we tap into that without spending £5,000, euros, or dollars to go to the Bahamas and bringing the kids there with us? How can we do that sat in our office chairs?
Yeah, there's quite a few pieces to the productivity aspects of flow. I'd say the main ones are realizing that we have biorhythms and we have natural ups and downs during the day. So we function on about a 90-minute of a performance cycle, and then we need about a 15 to 30-minute break to reset our system. And if we can have that reset without checking our phones or without doing an activity that keeps us in that paying attention state, then we're actually shifting our brain state and our neurochemistry so that we can then be on a high performance again for the next 90-minute cycle. And that's really what it's being fully on and fully off, and maintaining that is one of the keys for sure.
Yeah, it's really leveraging, our body's natural clock. And this is the same reason why anyone who knows anything about giving presentations, workshops, or trainings will do it in 90-minute segments or modules. That's why I've done it for years and years and years, because our attention span, as you just said now, the performance, it literally will run 90-minute segments over there. So it was really about keeping their attention, doing that, then giving them that break. Obviously, people are going to check their phones nowadays. So I guess so I guess that leads to another point, which is because of the whole dopamine fix we were talking, the instant gratification monkey inside of our brains. Should we just abstain from things like phone usage, TV, all that kind of stuff, or what would be the best fit, especially when we live in the culture where we have our phones in our pockets or on our desks, and it's people are watching us either on their phone or on their laptop screens now, getting pinged with notifications. It's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, it has to be managed in the same way as you would treat another block of 90 minutes. I mean, the checking of phones and checking of notifications is the same as checking emails in terms of what it does to your brain. It's not something that recharges you. It's something that requires active focus. And so that needs to be taken into account as a task. I tend to not check my phone until about 11 a.m. or noon. And that's when I've done at least 2+ 90-minute cycles, depending on what I've got going on. But it's just about setting myself up to then be able to batch all of that stuff later in the day, like emails and phone and everything that has to do with inbox and notification has its own 90-minute block. And that's separate from the mental recovery periods. Because if we try to do a 90-minute block and do our notifications in the rest period, and then another 90-minute block, that's where we start draining our energy and start, really not running optimally.
Yeah, and I saw that a couple of people liked that just now. If anyone does want to throw in a comment or a like, go ahead. Specifically what you were just saying now with not checking the phones first thing in the morning, and the rates of mobile phone addiction has gone through the roof. And I was thinking, why is this, and what is it even? And someone came up with the answer to it. They said that if you check your phone immediately upon waking up, you are addicted to your phone if you do that every single day. Guess what? That's what a lot of people do. And I did myself. I did that for so long. So just simple things like putting the phone into another room, for example, that helped me. I don't know if I could go for 3 hours, a 2 90-minute block, not checking my phones or emails or anything like that. So how do you get there?
I think the separation as well is the phone is not. The phone is an addiction, but it's not an addiction in the same way as cocaine is, in the way that a phone is also a professional tool. Mm-hmm. And by that overlap, it does have its justifications. As a peak performance coach, I'm not going to be one to tell people not to do X, Y, Z. Mm-hmm. I'll make them aware of the trade-offs. I'll say, look, if you check your phone first thing in the morning, you're going to be setting your dopamine baseline really high. And if you have a deep work block to do after that, it's going to be harder and you're going to be more prone to distractions because you've raised your dopamine bar this high in the morning. And so your brain is wanting to match that level on a task that's this level of dopamine. And so by getting into a habit of flipping them and doing the deep work first without distractions, without phones, then I move into using phones and, let's say, higher dopamine, higher stimulation activities. Yeah, so that's one way, is kind of planning your day around that.
That makes sense. It's like basically deep work without dopamine, because that dopamine, you get a hit of it, then you're going to want to have another one shortly afterwards when it's wearing off, or even whilst it's still peaking. So it's about what can be done about that. And there's a lot being said about deep work, not getting distracted. And I think one of the major points you've hit on is what's called task switching. We hear a lot about multitasking, doing the same thing at the same time, which is really task switching. It's basically when you're doing a task and then something comes up, you're interrupted over here, and that task you were doing that may take usually 60 minutes, that's now going to take block 90 minutes, and then it's talking another 2 hours. You're switching from one task to another, back and forth, and it's flipping. And flipping between tasks is flipping crazy. It really is. And I guess you speak with a lot of executives, a lot of other entrepreneurs, a lot of people who need to do that deep work. So anything else they can do to avoid the distractions and eventually get into that flow state they're seeking?
The elimination of as many notifications, emails, and all of that is a huge part of it. Interruptions and distractions are a huge flow killer. And it takes on average 11 to 23 minutes to get back into a task when we get interrupted. And so if we can imagine that's the impact of one disruption and we compound that over a lifetime, we're talking about weeks, months, plus years of wasted time and energy. Whereas if we just create a schedule, we create rigid boundaries, like, okay, this is my focus time, my phone's on airplane mode sort of thing, power through that, we leverage those efficiency gains. And I think, it definitely does deserve being said, the thing about task switching, minimizing that as much as possible. One thing I want to share for the audience is we know that task switching is not ideal. I'll give a brain circuit reason behind why. When we go from one task to another, we're engaging different brain circuits. So not only is there the time wasting, but you're actually switching between different brain circuits that are related to the different tasks. And that multiplies your chances of thinking about something else that might be connected exponentially, as well as just the cost, the energetic cost of switching between the brain circuits. So it can go pretty deep and pretty detailed. Which is where the whole science of flow really helps put all of that mainstream productivity into more of an oomph. It tells you all the things that you might hear in mainstream productivity, but gives that neuroscience angle to it, to give it like that, oh, wow, I knew I heard about this thing, but now that I know the energetic cost and all of that, I'm really going to implement it.
You have to really think about the payoffs, and that's one thing that when we do switch tasks, not only are we then thinking about something else, and then our brain's going to go off into another angle, you're going to forget, what was it that I was doing earlier? Ever been into a room before and then you forget why you entered that room, for example?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. And I guess there is the case for, we do need to have the balance between, the rigid boundaries. When you're in your focus cave, as I call it, you're in your focus cave, airplane mode, must power out everything off, silent door. But with things like, especially working from home, which a lot of people are now doing, or in hybrid mode since the pandemic, people who have like kids, for example, your kid comes knocking on the door, like, Mummy, Daddy, it's like, that's going to be a distraction in and of itself, has to be dealt with sometimes. And I guess it's the question of, do you want to be like true to the flow state and like productivity first? Or is you going to be like, because I remember like when I was doing that as a kid, I still remember being 5-6 years old. My dad, he would be working from home as he had a business. And then he'd be like, don't disturb me now. And then slam the door in my face. So it's like, I guess it's a question of priorities. What do you want? And how can you set boundaries, but be flexible instead of rigid about it? Because kids can be a huge distraction. What can you do with when they have kids? Because you still need to provide for them. You still need to work for them, get into that flow state of work. How can people deal with that?
I mean, honestly, this is a very person situation specific thing, and very values determined. As you said, it depends on your priorities, right? The ideal is to design a life where, you know, you can get everything done within focus blocks and have family time and nothing, you know, but that's too much of an ideal world. Reality is there are distractions, there are interruptions. And so I've one thing I recommend, and something I've gotten into the habit of, is using every distraction and interruption that happens as an opportunity for mental recovery. So I'll be on a task and then get interrupted, and then something happens. Either I have to deal with it or I don't, regardless of what happens. Then instead of jumping back on that task, I just take 5 minutes, you know, whether it's go get a drink of water or go for a 5-minute walk or do some stretching, something that will recharge my brain a little bit and get me back into, okay, what was I doing before? Yeah. And actually you get more in a state that you're able to dive back into it.
Exactly. This is about leveraging all distractions. And this is where meditation, which is one of the ultimate flow state activities, has helped me. Whenever I meditate now, it doesn't matter if it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, I will use all distractions. So I invite them in. It's why I love meditating outside, because then you can hear people, you know, with their phones playing loudly or walking past you. Sometimes I meditate with eyes open and you see people. And all of these distractions are invitations to go back into the body, using everything to become even more aware. It's not the typical conventional view that people have in meditation when they think to themselves, oh, I want to block all thoughts out of my mind. I want the mind to be quiet. No, that's not actually the goal. The goal is to be aware of what's going on in the mind, what's going on in the body, what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're smelling, even everything, and using all distractions as an invocation to go deeper into that flow state. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's it reminds me of something I heard recently. Every time you get a distraction in meditation and come back into the body, that's like doing a mental rep. You know, it's like putting the reps in the gym, but for the mind. Whereas if we think about the meditation from the classic perspective, the one where you say we try to block everything out, then you don't really get that repetition of keeping back into centered focus.
Yeah, it's really about seeing it for what it is. And actually, all distractions, whenever a thought or an emotion will flood, and usually that of frustration, for example, you get distracted doing something and then you're frustrated. It's actually the answer itself in the emotion. The frustration isn't a case of, oh, I failed doing what I'm doing now, you know, the kids have rushed in or something like that. No, actually, you're succeeding because you're noticing the gaps to the focus block, the gaps to the flow state. And that is going to help you go back into flow. It's about being aware of when you're not in flow until you are basically in a state of, again, flow most of the time. When you only realize, oh, actually, only when something takes you out of it. That would be one of the ultimate states, to really be in this flow state 24/7. But to a lot of people may look like it's unachievable. And I guess right now what people maybe want is more energy, more focus at the time that is needed, correct?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's really about like other energy boosters. And I guess we can look at like other things that may drain energy. We spoke about a couple of those things, already, distractions being one of them. We looked at external substances. What else can drain people's energy? Like, what is it that would take people's energy down and make them less productive?
Fixed mindsets, fixed worldviews, negative mindsets and worldviews are a big one. We've talked about distractions and interruptions, tense emotions and stress as well, and just having a lot on. One of the big drivers of flow is just doing less, as in having less projects. But of course, that has to be, you know, customized based on our personal goals, our lifestyle, etc.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I was literally on a call earlier with someone who's working with me, and then she was saying about how overwhelmed she is. She's saying she should be doing a lot, too much to do, you know? It's that sense of overwhelm. And what we came up to is really who's overwhelmed, who's saying they should, who's shoulding on themselves, you know? And it's these things like sometimes there is genuinely quite a lot to do. I can imagine if there's a doctor working in ER and then they're on call, they have to get into that focus, that flow state. Otherwise, the patient in front of them may die. You know, they just have to. And yeah, but then there could be other examples where people just have the sense of overwhelm. It feels like there's a lot to do. But what can they actually do about it? Say, for example, you're looking at a task list or their life and they're saying, well, I have, the kids, maybe the kids are over here, you can compartmentalize, and then they have the business, and with each business, there are going to be different client projects, plus business development and marketing. As you know, they're going to take their wife or husband out for the weekend, or they're going to try if they can get a babysitter. And that can feel overwhelming in itself. I'm overwhelmed just saying that out loud, What can people do to kind of like reduce the sense that there's so much to do in so little time?
Yeah, so some of it might be unconscious. I always I see the roadmap to peak performance having really three big pillars.
Mm-hmm.
One is a strong sense of purpose and the kind of lifestyle that you want to design. One is all those skills of flow, which is all about how to map your day with your different tasks at what times. So I'll give a few examples. Depending on if you're a morning or a morning person or a night owl, there are different types of tasks between focused work or creative work that require different types of thinking. Focused work is very focused. Creative work and strategy work is more divergent. It's more connecting different dots. And the less we mix those two things, the more efficiencies we can drive. So when we have a task that we have to do, but we're not sure how we're going to do it, we don't have a clear step-by-step that we're going to follow, then one subtask is to map out what is the step-by-step strategy so that when I do this task, I'm going to be in focus mode, clearing all the steps. So that helps your brain stay, when it's focused, stay in focus mode. And when it's in strategy mode, stay in strategy mode and be a bit more binary in the same way as single tasking versus multitasking.
Mm-hmm.
Then I think we're in a world where we have so many solutions now. We as human beings individually, I believe, are being better enabled to operate within our zone of genius. And so as much of the do, delay, delete, delegate that we can apply, we have to apply that filter to everything. I don't know if it's worth explaining. I'm assuming the audience would know that matrix.
Yeah, probably best to explain it now anyway. So that's the Eisenhower grid or matrix, where if you can imagine, like in 4 quadrants, then you can have, important, and then you have urgent. So, the things that are important and urgent, you would do that straight away. The things that are, not important but urgent, you can delegate that. The things that, are important but not urgent, you can delay that and then set a time. And if it's neither important nor urgent, just delete it. It doesn't need to be done. That's basically it in a nutshell.
Exactly. So I would examine everything that we do in our life through 3 filters. One filter is that zone of genius filter, the Eisenhower matrix, as you've just explained. Another one is the leverage filter. So is this going to bring incremental gains towards my goals or exponential gains? And how accurate the task is relative to that. And the third filter would be your personal values. So if you really examine your life with these 3 filters, you can gain some efficiencies there.
Yeah. And with that being said, like all of these are part of the pillars that you were saying, but I think one of the most important is not only the values, but also the purpose and the identity. Because a lot of people do make the mistake of trying to, plaster on this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to plaster on like the latest like productivity hack. Or like, here's an Eisenhower technique. Or I'm going to do this system or that system. At the end of the day, it has to suit you. And most people don't even start by asking the question, which is what I take everyone through in the beginning. Who am I? Basic question. Most men choke on their beer. Most women will just freeze up before even answering that. And the reason is because we're so used to identifying men, especially as, oh, entrepreneur, boss, manager, student, this or that. And it's very cultural, you know. The person with the surname Smith, well, he'll be a blacksmith, for example. Cobbler was a shoemaker. And women typically identify within the family role. Mother, for example, is the most common level of identity for a woman. Until we start with that level of identity, it's pointless to go beyond that, because everything has to start from within.
Exactly. And I think what you just shared, especially the part about Smith and blacksmith, it takes me back to old times, and it makes me think about our evolution. Before the last 1,000 years, we were much more connected to our purpose. And especially, 10,000 years ago and beyond, there were so little things that we had options of doing, right? That the zone of genius was the person, and there was no real opportunity cost. Whereas in today's day and age, even compared to 100 years ago, where people would stay in the same job for 5, 10, 20 years plus, in the modern world, it's a lot shorter. There's a lot more switching. And because of new technologies and new disruptions, there's an exponentially higher opportunity cost to everything that we do. And because our brains are constantly seeking out new information, because we were wired that way for survival, we're also constantly distracted or chasing shiny objects of new opportunities, because we never know, but another opportunity might be 10 times better for us than the one we're currently in. But that's a modern world problem that we have to really evolve into adapting.
It's the shiny gold object syndrome, and craving the shiny gold object. Craving kills consistency. And what will get us to a place of being consistent, and it starts with purpose. If you know what you're about and who you're for, then you can withstand it. A big why can withstand any how or what. And it's difficult, and sometimes that why could be something like, I am going to be the best father or mother for my kids. And when you are, then you're not going to go out on the weekend and sniff a whole bunch of cocaine because you want to feel good. No, you're going to be a responsible person, obviously. It could also look like simply doing your best in the business because you're called to serve people. And that's what you and I both do. We have that lens, that clear purpose of direction, probably built up through some of the things we spoke about earlier, like the hospitalizations, for example. Going through tough times that other people haven't been through allows us to help people who may never go there come out stronger the other side. So when people go through your roadmap, and we've only got 5 minutes left now, but when people go through the roadmap, what kind of results, what kind of things do they get out of it? We've touched upon how they can get more energy, more focus, more flow in their work life, be less overwhelmed. But what are some typical things they get to experience in the journey with you?
Boosts in motivation, perseverance, grit, mood, emotional regulation. The time and energy is also an obvious one. I mean, we're talking about 3 to 5x more productive. We also, when we look with leverage, we gain even higher. So sometimes it results in more money, more time with family, more life experiences, or just feeling better about where they're at in life. Because the truth is, there is a huge learning curve, no matter what we are aspiring to. And I would say another outcome, which is less obvious, is it paves the way for unconscious work. Now, I'm not a therapist, but I plan to train in some kind of therapy modality at some point so that I can deliver both ends of the spectrum, coaching and therapy. But once we've locked in the skills of flow states and we are performing at our peak from a conscious level, then we can uncover some of our unconscious self-sabotage, which might have to do with the emotional work, and that is huge already, because it's then I get that it's, the reason that I have this or that problem. Like I'm an emotional eater, but I never knew that until I'd stopped drinking, stopped festivals, stopped substances, stopped smoking, stopped going on holidays. Not that I stopped going on holidays, but using holidays as an escape, like novel experiences as an escape.
Basically,
Stop running away from all of that. Then I realize when I'm in a certain kind of situation, then I turn to food, and it's like, oh, okay, there's something else in here. And for me, my journey into peak performance has always been about health. It's not that I'm not particularly, I didn't start out passionate about productivity, but I ended up that way because I realized it was an accelerator for health. And for me, it started with mental health, but it's circling back to physical health, because the mind and body are definitely one and connected. And so once we've identified and learned the skills of flow, we can then realize, actually, if I'm doing my best on all levels and it's not a skill problem and it's not a purpose problem, there's something deeper within me that I can be examined. And I think that's very powerful.
It's tapping into the deeper states, and there's a lot that can be done. But I love how you basically framed it as it's really a health thing. It's really about improving your health, your vitality, so that you can show up better in the world, in your business, or with your family, or for yourself. Anyone who wants to have a chat with Anthony, then you can reach out to him. Here is what, a 20-minute coffee catch up, is that right? If you go to that link, bit.ly/.
Yeah, it's a 20-minute coffee. We can use it as a 10 to 15 minutes if you're on the pressed side. We can use it as a half an hour if you've got more time to spare, and we can talk about things that would help you on your focus, flow, energy, and health journey.
Was that meant to be a pun when you said it's on the pressed side?
I didn't realize it.
Yeah, the French press, and that's actually where you're at. You're in France at the moment, right?
I'm in France at the moment, yeah.
Yeah, I might be heading out to see you in a couple of months. Next stop is Miami, then Bahamas, back to Peru, and then Europe, spend some time in Amsterdam. Cool. If anyone wants to have a chat with me, and I'm also happy to introduce you to Anthony, we can discuss any other blocks over here. But Anthony, you're really on the health, side of things, really helping entrepreneurs with flow, going to give them that roadmap, and any blocks, and also feel free to reach out to me there at meet.adjelevate.com. We're kind of coming towards the end of our time. We just got 2 minutes left. So, Anthony, we've spoken through really a lot of things here. We've spoken towards, flow, peak performance, energy, getting more done, a bit of time management techniques that unexpectedly came up, and also, festivals, dance, and a couple of activities. So if there's like one thing you want to leave people with, what would that be? Like, what's one thing they can do differently?
I think the biggest thing is really getting into the habits of not using those 5-minute breaks to check phones, even if it's 2 minutes between checking emails and the next task. Resisting doing that thing that's going to stimulate you more, and instead leaning into just closing your eyes, staring at a wall, having a walk, going for a stretch, and keep compounding that, because that's going to make a huge difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so
reboot your brain.
Reboot your brain. I like that.
Yeah.
Give your brain a bit of a reset, because your brain is the most powerful tool, it's the most powerful supercomputer, and we all reboot our computers. So thank you very much, Anthony.
Exactly.
It's been a
Thank
pleasure.
you, Alex.
And can't wait to see you either at Osho either. I know you said that you go to festivals just to escape, but maybe we can hit up a festival in the summer.
I'm building a life of getting high naturally, of which that is festivals.
yeah, I mean, there's many great sober festivals in the UK and
Absolutely.
elsewhere in the world. So yeah, for those of
Yeah,
you watching, hope you get more done with the best, reboot your brain and get into flow. Take care.
exactly. Thank you, Alex.
Welcome.